Hello and welcome to the Pig Edge, Teagasc Pig podcast with me, Ciarán Carroll, bringing you all the latest news, information and advice to keep Irish pig farmers up to date. And for this episode, we're looking at health and safety on the farm with Francis Bligh, Health and Safety Specialist with Teagasc. And I first asked Francis, could he tell us what the situation was on farms currently regarding health and safety, and are there any indications that trends are improving?
We had a good year last year from the perspective of numbers were down. I suppose what I should say is the data from the Health and Safety Authority tell us that across all enterprises, sadly, 10 people lost their lives last year in 2021 on farms. And unfortunately, so far this year, we're at 10. So 10 families this year have lost a loved one, which is very sad for those people and their communities. When we look across, I suppose, what's causing these accidents over the last 10 years, we see that tractors and farm vehicles are normally and have over the last 10 years caused half those fatalities. Falls from heights, 10%, falling loads, 7%. Animal related are always, and again, in the last 10 years, 19% of deaths, around that 19-20% of deaths. And drowning, gassing and timber related made up the remaining for the period.
Would you have any specifics on pig farms relative to the overall picture of health and safety and causes of accidents?
Yeah, so for pig farms, in the last 10 years, the HSA recorded one death to a pig farmer, or a pig farmer lost their life due to a farm accident, which is very sad for that family, and condolences in that. What I would say is that when we think about pig farms, we need to think about the big risks. And sometimes, injuries are where the big problems are. And sometimes also people don't think about the injuries that maybe are slow and don't happen all of a sudden, like breaking an arm. Injuries like, say, exposure to dust and gases and microorganisms are one of the big issues on pig farms. The air within pig buildings can contain many contaminants that are hazardous. There's lots of particulates there, like animal dander, fecal material, urine, from pigs and rodents. Feed components, bedding materials, absorbed gases, chemicals, they're all there in those buildings, and they can have an effect on your respiratory system. Some 70 to 90% of swine dust is thought to be biologically active in its effects. So that's a big problem. And you might ask me, Ciarán, what can be done about that? And that's a good question. And what I would say is, HSA guidance, the Health and Safety Authority guidance in relation to this is making sure, and all pig farmers do their best in this regard, regular and thorough cleaning, regular maintenance of equipment and feeding equipment, putting in small amounts of vegetable oil can reduce dusts and odors and gases. Keeping the swine calm, when they're being moved, exciting them can increase dust concentrations. Obviously, air filtration is important. Well-designed and managed filtration and ventilation systems are very, very important. That they're properly sized, that they have proper fans, and they're distributing the air through the inlets and controls in a good fashion. Nitrogen concentration, then trying to reduce that. How do you do that? Possibly the best way is through reducing the amount of protein in the diets, so that needs to be managed, and you need to do that in consultation with your advisors. Personal protective equipment is always the last line of defense. It's when everything else isn't working for you, you have to resort to the personal protective equipment. And what do we need to keep in mind in relation to that is, I suppose, making sure that the people that are using the personal protective equipment, when they're using it, they know why they're using it and where to use it. So you need to have them properly trained in identifying when it's needed and using it correctly, making sure it's correct fitting, that the right masks are used in the right places. And, obviously in places where there's toxic gases, you need to have proper training, and it's only a situation where breathing apparatus can be used in those situations. So what I'm saying really there is the right equipment in the right place and proper training to know where to use it. And obviously, when you have finished with your PPE, it's important that it's cleaned, it's separated, and it's disposed of correctly.
pig farming, it's a physically demanding job, Francis, so like there's jobs around the place like tagging, moving pigs, weighing pigs, a lot of manual work involved in that, and a lot of walking, I suppose. On average, pig farmers can walk up to 20,000 steps per day. Have you any evidence of the ill effects of the physical demands of the day-to-day job?
Yes, Ciarán, musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, as we do say, are the greatest cause of farmer occupational ill health, with more than half of farmers affected annually. You might ask what parts of the body are affected. Back, knees, hips are the main ones, and it's important to kind of think about this in the context of the type of work that you're trying to do. Over 80% of MSD injuries are cause more than 3 work days lost, with 24% causing more than 30 days lost. So why is it happening? It's happening due to, I suppose, lack of preventative approaches to avoid heavy lifting, overreaching, twisting the spine. You need to think about the routine, about what's been done on farms, and how it's been done. Are you able to make changes to help make the jobs more efficient, reduce stress in the body? Is there equipment that you can use or to make the job easier, require less lifting? And obviously, when you're lifting, it's important to make sure that you and everybody else in the farm are properly trained to lifting. So, taking time out to do that manual handling course. The training will show you how to lift the load, how to keep it close to your body, how to lift different types of loads, the importance of workstations and their height, and exercise and managing exercise and stretches, during and before doing types of work. You mentioned the 20,000 steps, Ciarán, and what I would say there is it's very important, and people like yourself would always say it's important to keep an eye on your footwear. If you were going out to do a run and there was going to be 20,000 steps, you'd always make sure you had good runners. It's also important in the workplace that you have good footwear. Not using Wellingtons, trying to making sure you have your boots, changing them regularly, maybe every 6 months. Look at the sole. It's important to look at the sole for wear. If the soles are wearing on one side or the other, it might mean that, obviously you could have issues with your knees or your hips or your spine, and later, if you don't have it at the moment, you might have it in a few weeks or months or years if you don't take action. And obviously, surfaces around the yard are important to make sure that they're non-slip and that it increases the efficiency and the management of getting around the farm.
Very good. Yeah, some good practical advice there. In terms of legal requirements, on pig farms, what are the legal requirements, from a health and safety perspective? So
the legal requirements are listed under the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005. What they require really are of employers or of the pig farmer is to do everything so far as reasonably practicable to reduce risks. So you must have a risk assessment, and that is required for 3 or less employees, or a safety statement if it's more than 3 employees. So employer has a primary duty to provide a safe place and system of work. And really, the ethos on the farm must be that all accidents can be avoided. So the Health and Safety Authority have an electronic platform through a private company. It's called besmart.ie, and that actually works to provide I suppose, what would you call it? It's a platform where you can actually develop your own safety statement for your own farm. And it's important that all farmers have a safety statement prepared. Some farmers will hire consultants to provide their safety statement, and other farmers can use this HSA portal to develop their own safety statement for their farm. But it's vitally important that it's in place.
Okay, very good. And in terms of training, you mentioned training earlier. What training for equipment operation is needed on farms, or needs to be provided, let's say, on farms?
So I might go back to saying that, when you have people working on your farm, you need to make sure that they're competent to do the job. And you need to make sure that, the types of jobs that they're doing, that, they're not putting themselves at risk or anybody else at risk on the farm. So training is really kind of dependent on the type of work that the actual person is going to do. And that means that the person, you as the pig farmer, must decide what training is required to do. So obviously, if a person is working, let's say, a forklift in in the stores or moving materials around the yard, then you need to spend time with them, making sure that they're able to operate that forklift. Obviously, forklift training would be useful for that particular individual. Other types of courses that you might consider appropriate and needed and required would be manual handling training. Teleporter, maybe if there's a teleporter in the yard, first aid training, half-day safety courses, maybe fire officer training could be important as well. So what I'm saying really there is, depending on the type of pig farm that you are and their size and the amount of activity that's taking place, the type of equipment that's on site, it's important to have a training record or a training plan for the farm, and that your employees are part of that plan, and that every year you decide what type of training is required, and that individuals within your farm actually take part in that training. And over time, it will pay dividends in relation to making the farm safer and employees happier and more responsible about the type of work they're doing and more competent to do it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Everybody involved in it from the start. Yeah, you mentioned also personal protective equipment, PPE, there earlier, and I suppose it's universally recognised to protect ourselves, and we heard a lot about it throughout COVID and that. But it is commonplace on farms to have PPE and dry PPE. What safety materials are essential for pig farms?
So for pig farms, again, it depends on the type of work that's taking place, and some I suppose pig farmers will hire in different types of contractors to do different types of work. But generally, I suppose what we're talking about here is that there's a sufficient supply of quality and approved gloves, coveralls, Wellingtons, masks, aprons, goggles, ear defenders. The list can be as big or as small, depending on the type of a farm, but you need to have the type of equipment on your farm available for your employees and yourself to make that job safe. And as I said before, you need to try and put controls in place to ensure that the job is done in a way that means that you have the least amount of PPE required, but when it's required, it needs to be in place, and it needs to be in good quality and good order and used and worn appropriately.
And in terms then, look, if we look at pig farms, they have casual labour, they have permanent people working there full time with them. What are the duties of the employers from a health and safety perspective? And also then on the other side of it, what's the responsibility of the employee? What's to their duties on the farm?
The Safety, Health and Welfare at Work 2005 Act places responsibilities on both the employer and employee. So the employer must provide and maintain a safe place of work, equipment, safe systems, and organisation of work, and also checking and ensuring the competence of employees, providing information, instruction and training to those employees. So there's a large amount of responsibility there for the employer. But on the other side also, the employee must cooperate with their employer in complying with the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work legislation. They must take care to avoid injury or ill health to themselves or others. They must report any defects they notice to their employer in the place or system of work which there might be a hazard. And they must use all items, equipment or personal protective equipment in a safe manner. Again, it means that as part of the safety management system on the farm, all that needs to be kind of connected together, and that the employer and employee are working hand in glove in relation to making sure that the farm is as safe as possible. Moving
on then, on the undesirable situation where an accident does happen on farms, what steps should be taken?
Well, the first thing really to think about is that the person that had the accident happened to, you need to provide first aid, and there needs to be a person there on site that can provide that first aid. And obviously then, when necessary, ringing the emergency services 999 or 112. It's always very important to have the air code of the farm posted up in a lot of different places around the farm, so that is easily identifiable by yourself and others that are working on the farm. It's the legal requirement to notify the HSA if a workplace accident prevents a person from performing their normal duties of work for more than 3 calendar days, not including the date of the accident.
Look, farmers, often overlook their own personal health. They put the farm or other commitments, as family, external interests first, and leave their own well-being to the end of the list of priorities. And if you look at what pig farmers have gone through the last 12, 18 months, they've experienced serious challenges, from poor pig prices, increase in input prices, and new regulations coming on the line as well. Can you give some tips on how farmers can look after themselves first and foremost?
it's a tough world out there after COVID, and with the issues associated with, as you said there, prices and financial worries, and in addition to that, then fatigue and trying to work long hours and trying to find staff. It's not easy. So, I'd encourage all farmers to talk to each other first of all. So, it's important. Like most farmers, big farmers are dealing with the same problems, and other farmers as also. So it's important to talk to each other first, and it's also very important to talk to advisors and other support organizations, so that you kind of share your problems, and obviously there are kind of certain solutions out there that can help. It's also important then to kind of mind yourself in relation to develop off-farm interests, trying to do things that are a little bit different, getting away from the farm and getting a bit of help in. I know financially it's difficult to do that, but making sure that you can get away very regularly from the farm and get a bit of time for yourself and your family. Always do your health check regularly, yearly, with your health professional. Making sure obviously that you're getting plenty of food and water and sleep. If there are issues from a health perspective, don't kind of ignore them. Get help with them. Talk about them, make sure that you're trying to take action associated with them. On the farm, making sure you have your first aid box there and it's well stocked. Bring a charged mobile phone with you when you're working around the farm and not being alone. I might just follow. Maybe the last thing I might say is that bit about talking to each other as farmers and talking to your advisor is very important. Sometimes issues can be solved and you can get help with these problems that you might have.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And we did a podcast with George Graham on mental health and well-being there back in April, and it was excellent. So some listeners might want to go back and have a listen to that as well. It's well worth hearing as well. In terms of just some work-specific questions that I would have heard from farmers and advisors there of late when we were talking about putting this podcast together. Asbestos sheeting, it was once very commonly used, as a product, and still in situ in some older buildings on farms. What would you recommend, from the point of view of if a building needs to be demolished or refurbished or whatever in terms of asbestos removal?
Yeah, so obviously asbestos is highly carcinogenic. So once you're in the zone of thinking about demolishing or refurbishing a building, you need to think about the contractor you're going to hire to do the work. Either you or that contractor are going to have to hire or have the ability to remove that asbestos within, I suppose, the legal requirements. And that really means that, they have to have the capacity to set up enclosures. They have to be able to remove, have operatives wear protective clothing, respiratory protective equipment. All equipment used must be up to date. The company must be legally certified to carry out hazardous waste collection. And they must be fully approved and trained, insured to handle, collect and transport asbestos. So what I'm saying there is that when you start on this journey to do this work, either you are going to hire the company to take away the asbestos, or the company that's going to do the refurbishment is going to hire a company to do that. There's a small number of companies out there that are legally, I suppose, certified to remove, take off, remove, and dispose of asbestos. So you need to make sure that it's done by one of those companies.
Yeah, so it's a job for the professionals. In terms of fire and fire risk, what can pig farms do? What would they or should they include in their fire plans to try and improve an existing fire plan?
So obviously fires, has horrendous consequences for the employer and the employees, and obviously the business itself. So anybody trying to deal with a fire, or the consequences of a fire, it's something you definitely want to avoid. So where do you start? Really, you need to start by thinking about the type of work that's happening on the farm, and how it's been done, and that it's not causing any risk of fire. So that, that's very, very important, first of all. Then obviously electrical circuits, fuse cabinets, it should be regularly checked. Get your electrician in, regularly check all your electrical equipment. You need to obviously have, the correct fire rating for the building. You need to have a sufficient source of water. Very important also, maybe to get the fire officer to have a look around so that they are familiar with the actual site and what's happening on site. sometimes maybe, when a fire brigade comes in to deal with a fire, it takes them a while to get to know what's happening and where it's happening and where water is, the types of animals that are in different buildings. All that can be done maybe beforehand if a fire officer can come in and maybe give a small bit of advice also in relation to what you can do to make it easier for them and to avoid obviously having the fire in the first place. So correct water tank size, hose connections for fire engines, and then obviously having fire drills and having a fire officer, someone on the farm that has responsibility of keeping an eye out for issues associated with fire risk, and obviously taking control of having regular fire drills.
And another one here for you, solar panels. We're getting a lot of queries from farmers now, looking at reducing energy costs and things like that, and solar panels is one of the key alternatives we're being told about. Is there anything to be aware of from a health and safety perspective from solar panels or the use of them?
Yeah, so obviously, anything you try to do to make things better, you don't want unintended consequences associated with that. So when you start down the road of thinking about putting up solar panels, you need to think about the company that you're going to contract to do this type of work. If you're going to do it under TAMS, there's a large number of different terms and conditions that you need to kind of make sure that you adhere to when you're going down this road. The first thing maybe is to think about the building that you're going to put it on. What type of as we talked about earlier, roofing material is there? Is there asbestos, and is that going to have an issue with putting them up there? Obviously, the structure of the building underneath, has it the capacity to actually hold those solar panels? Is there a need to have, or should you need to have a structural engineer to look at the building beforehand? The company that puts them up, if it's under TAMS, they have to do risk assessments. They have to hold on to the calculations and the assessments that they do afterwards to ensure that there's adequate time spent on looking at, let's say, wind risk, structural issues associated with trying to put up the panels. Obviously, the wiring then is very, very important. There needs to be isolation switches in place to ensure that, if issues arise, let's say where maybe there's wind or something like that and roofing materials start to move, then you need to be able to isolate these particular pieces of equipment, these solar panels, so that issues, so that they don't create a fire risk or electrocution risk. Low location of batteries and inverters and the types that you actually purchase, there needs to be thought put into that as well, where they're located and that they're not causing any fire risk. They need to be included in your safety statement also. So, when they come in on site and they're put into place, you need to include them in your safety statement in relation to how they're being managed and the procedures associated with them.
And just finally, just to finish off, we're heading now into the darker end of the year and hitting into winter time. What winter tips would you have for farmers?
Well, just a few really. Like, I suppose try lone working is something that might start to happen a little bit more often, as maybe people working early mornings or late evenings on their own. Try to work in pairs if you can, and make sure you bring a mobile phone with you. What I would say is, from the perspective of noise, sometimes the feeding time, it can be over 80 decibels. So I didn't mention ear protection, but it's important to have it and have it with you if you're in the buildings at that particular time. Falls from heights can be an issue also. Obviously, maybe some maintenance, as we talked about earlier, maintenance done to buildings before, maybe obviously well in advance of storms or after storms or something like that. It's important to kind of make sure that there's kind of a procedure there for getting up there, that you are competent to do it. Obviously, we'd be recommending bringing in contractors on site to do that type of work. Farm equipment around the yard maybe moving a little bit more often. People have been knocked down in buildings and yards. It is becoming an increasing problem, and the HSA statistics are showing it. So what we're really saying there is try to avoid blind corners, or try to design them out so that you don't have machines coming around the corner. And people maybe walking out in front of them, maybe not being able to hear them due to other machines that are working close by. Encouraging operators to drive at appropriate speeds. Obviously, good lighting at this time of the year is important, so taking time now to get them cleaned back then to maybe working at heights, making sure you're using appropriate equipment to get up there to change bulbs or change lenses. Obviously, we're maybe recommending that you would get the certified electrician in to do those types of jobs also. Yard surfaces, sometimes maybe this time of the year you might get a chance to fix any holes or potholes or cracks that might be there that might be trip hazards. And doors, gates and barriers around the yard, they could be damaged during the year. It's important now to take time to replace them. And swinging doors are obviously very important, are very high risk, I should say. So maybe, if it was possible to take time to maybe move them to be sliding doors or roller doors, that'd be useful use of time as well.
Francis, thanks for joining us on the show today. There's some great advice there for our listeners, so I'm sure they'll get something out of it. So thanks for your time and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Ciarán. Thanks for having me on.
That's it for the latest episode of The Pig Edge, and my thanks to Francis Bligh for joining me on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow The Pig Edge on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss a show. And for more information on farming, go to teagasc.ie.